Before we get to today's episode, we want to introduce you to our newest partner, which, like us, is pure South Florida. That's Doral Toyota, where you can find all of your favorite Toyota models, whether you're looking for a new, used, or certified pre-owned vehicle. Doral Toyota is located at 9775 Northwest 12th Street. That's 9775 Northwest 12th Street, just a few blocks from International and Dolphin Malls. Experience the Doral difference, which means 4 years of complimentary maintenance and roadside assistance on all new vehicles. Also, in-house financing is available for credit-related issues. If you mention 5 Reasons when you call 305-680-1129, that's 305-680-1129, or stop into the dealership, you work with a dedicated manager, not a salesman. Unlike other dealers, Doral Toyota prides itself on an honest and transparent buying process. That's Doral Toyota, DoralToyota.com, or stop in at 9775 Northwest 12th Street. Vamos! Let's go! Welcome into the latest episode of the 5 Reasons podcast. I'm Ethan Skolnick here, as always, with Chris Whittingham. Now that you have found us, make sure that you subscribe or follow, depending on which option that your particular podcast app gives you. Also, we do ask that you rate and review where you can. That helps us get into sort of a better place on iTunes and other platforms, which allows us to expand. And speaking of expansion, we now have 13 podcasts in our network. We just added a 13th last night as we're taping this. It's going to be called Swings and Mishes with Craig Mish, covering the Marlins and MLB, which means we will be covering all 5 of the major teams in this market with exclusive podcasts in addition to all of the other things that we cover on our network. And if you're preparing for your fantasy drafts right now, which I know a lot of people are, make sure you check out Fantasy on 5 on iTunes, Podcast, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, and all of those other apps. You'll get all the information to run or win your league. All right, right now we are going to bring in somebody who used to be on the radio show with Chris Whittingham and I. Mike Wallace, who appeared on Light Skinned Opinions this week, and I know those guys want you too. He used to refer to Leroy as part of what he called our brother rotation on the afternoon drive show. We had it was Chris and I, and then we had Chris Perkins, we had Mike Wallace, and we had the mouth of the South, Leroy Hoard. You can find him at Big Mouth. Leroy, of course, played for the Cleveland Browns for many years. He's a Michigan man. We'll get into that a little bit here on the podcast. And you can also find him on the Tobin show with Leroy and Beast. That is on every day, 1 to 3 on 790 The Ticket. Leroy, we appreciate you doing this. I'm assuming you have some opinions for us today.
Yeah, quite a few. It's always me, me and Ethan. And I don't know as much about you, Whittingham. We got along too good. We shared a beverage together. I never thought it was that big of a deal. We went to an event, and me and Chris were sitting next to each other, and we were ordering food. And we just looked at each other and said, "Hey, you want to split a cider?" And so so everybody's been giving us the stink eye ever since, and I'm like, I didn't think it was that big of a deal.
Now, Leroy always goes around revoking man cards, and so yes. I was prepared to order a beer that was sort of a requisite level of manly. But then when you looked at me and go, I really like cider beer, I'm like, great, because I really like cider beer too, and I'm glad you've allowed me the opportunity to have my own.
By the way, I'm not your get out of jail free card, okay? You still can get your man card revoked.
But I will have it. I will have it revoked on any number of things. At least it's not that for you.
Yes. It's always good because basically I have a player's perspective. So me and Ethan have gone at it on several occasions because he is a writer. He's always had the other side, and we just have different opinions about how he has to get what he needs to get and why journalists do what they do. So it's always been fun.
Yeah, and that's changed a lot too. I've come around to your perspective on a lot of that stuff. I may not admit that much on this particular episode, but I do think with where journalism has gone, it's gone to kind of a dark place in a lot of ways, and I do think it's made it tougher for the relationships between athletes and writers in particular, but also other media members, and just the way that content's consumed. And that's one of the reasons I think the podcast is a great medium, because when we have athletes on, I know that we're going to start having current Dolphins on the podcast starting next week. And I just think it's a better forum for a lot of guys, because they can express themselves and they're not going to be cut off, and it's not going to be misinterpreted. It is what it is. And so I do think where we're going here in the digital space, I think is going to create a better platform for athletes in South Florida and for teams in South Florida. But what we want to do with you today, we want to go through 5 topics with you. I know Tobin on his show, he usually has a few things kind of laid out. We're going to do something similar, and I've picked 5 that I think are sort of up your alley based on what I know interests you. And so we're going to start first with the situation at Ohio State. I'm going to ask you to put your bias aside here a little bit.
Yes, and everybody needs to understand, my hate for Ohio State has not wavered. And it will not waver, okay, based on my opinions of this situation. So don't think that I still don't hate Ohio State.
Which is such a weird deal, because, again, your pro career, obviously your college career, you're associated with that a lot and what you did in the Rose Bowl. But your pro career was largely, I mean, I know there was a Minnesota stop in there, unfortunately that kick, of course, or else you might be wearing a ring right now. But sorry to bring that one up. But your pro career was basically 45 minutes from Columbus. And so, you're kind of in the middle of this situation. So, how do you think, let's start here. What was Urban Meyer's responsibility, in your opinion, when he got the information about the coach on his staff?
Okay, now, this whole situation is so much deeper than people understand. And one, you have to understand why it was Zach Smith, right? Why he even has the job. He played under Urban. His mentor, Urban's mentor, was Zach Smith's grandfather, and Earl Bruce. Okay, so now we all know how we sometimes get jobs, how we have connections that get us in. What you do with that connection, that then becomes on you. Okay, so let's set that up. Now, there was a situation that occurred in 2015, and that was a domestic, I guess you would call it an incident. And the only reason why I call it an incident and nothing more than that is because that's all the police have told me. Now, according to Zach Smith, he went to Urban and said, hey, there's a situation, nothing happened. To which Urban said, hey, you get caught up in this. This is not allowed. If it happens, you're done. Okay. Urban Meyer says he then went and told the university. Now, if I'm an employer, okay, the resources that I have to find out if one of my employees is in a situation or what has happened is either what they've told me or the police report or the incident report or somebody doing some work. Now, keep in mind, this happened in 2015. So I'm wondering now why all these journalists and writers and reporters on this 3 years later.
Well, I think the reason for that is because the woman Courtney Smith was in the middle of filing a restraining order against him, and so that ended up in the public record, and that's how people found it.
Right, but there was already a restraining order. Okay, the reason why he got fired is because he violated that restraining order, and then when that became public, everybody started looking at the situation. Okay, so the thing that brought all this to the head is the fact that he violated his
restraining order.
Restraining order, right? So all that being said, Urban then fired him, which had to be tough because if you can imagine, I'm looking at, hey, somebody did me a favor and got me into whatever it is, right? I'm now taking his relative and taking him under my wing, and I'm being put in a position where I now have to fire him. So Urban had to feel, uncomfortable with it, but he did what he had to do. He says he told Ohio State. I don't understand, and I can't figure out if there was no police report, okay, if there's no other information, what was Ohio State or Urban Meyer supposed to do? Now, if Urban Meyer lied about any of this, that's a whole different story. But based on the information that we have right now, Ohio State is not supposed to go do investigating. That's why we have the police department. Okay, so many of us are complaining about the fact that all these organizations are coming in and going above the police department and passing judgment on incidents.
Well, I do think that there is a different standard between what will get you sort of charged with a crime versus what can get you fired from your job. Like you can
agreed. But in this situation, the only thing that Ohio State or Urban Meyer has is what Zach Smith has told them, and there's no police report.
But there is also prior history from the 2009 incident.
Okay, but that wasn't there.
No, but Urban Meyer knows that. I mean, Urban Meyer was his boss ostensibly at that time, and so he knows that this is a pattern of behavior. And you mentioned the lie. Yeah, go on.
Right. Agreed. Look, I get all you're saying, but what we're trying to determine, which I can't honestly determine, what is Ohio State supposed to do? He's never been charged. And of course, he's been in a couple of incidents. He got fired when he violated his restraining order, because now they're looking at it as, okay, look, Urban, I don't know whether they told him or he came to this on his own conclusion. Look, we got to do something. We can't have this around our program.
Yeah, I think when you ask, like, what do people want, the answer is people who commit domestic violence to be fired from their jobs, and whether that's fair, but that's just the way that people approach this issue now.
Okay, I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing, and here's where it gets okay. Is there proof that he committed any act of domestic violence?
Well, we do have a restraining order, and we do have the pictures that Courtney Smith, sent to Urban Meyer.
What if Ohio State or Urban Meyer never saw those pictures?
Well, this is the part that becomes more and more difficult to believe, which is, how does Shelley Meyer know, but Urban Meyer not know? Like, Shelley just sort of would have said to him, "Hey, Courtney sent me these pictures today, and it looks really screwed up." Like, I don't know. I can't envision a scenario in which that doesn't get from Shelley Meyer to Urban Meyer, just sort of in the course of natural conversation.
He basically said he lied. So
yeah,
that's you see again. He said he lied. Mm-hmm. So and I'm not okay. He lied to the media.
Yeah.
Which okay.
The question is, did he lie to his bosses?
I care how much.
Well,
right?
see, to me, yeah, Leroy, I think we are talking about two different standards, because I think part of the media outrage here is that, because, look, in the media, you don't like when people lie to you, particularly when they're, holding a position of authority. And Urban Meyer,
particularly when it looks like a cover-up.
Well, right. Right. And particularly in the times we're in right now, where obviously that's in the news every day on who's telling the truth and who's not. And people take sides on that. I mean, Urban Meyer is right. I mean, again, Ohio pretty well. Urban Meyer right now, with LeBron no longer plying his trade there.
Oh, yeah.
Urban Meyer is the biggest person in the state, correct? I mean,
sure.
bigger than the governor, right? Bigger than John Kasich, bigger than right.
Sure.
So I guess my question on this from a larger perspective too, and look, I think it's good that people know your opinion on Ohio State in general. So the fact that you can be unbiased about this and look at it, I think is appropriate. But how much do you think what happened at Penn State? Because I know you're familiar with that situation too, and again, we're talking about another program in that conference. How much of the way that they handled it or didn't handle it, I guess, which I know there's still debates about.
And the same with Michigan State. The same with Michigan State. The same with Baylor.
Michigan State is the other one. Which, to be honest, I don't think the Michigan State one has gotten enough attention. Actually, I mean, what happened at Michigan State, what happened at Penn State was horrible. What happened at Michigan State, is that on steroids? One. I mean, and that involves people who are in Congress now calling out other politicians. So I mean, how much of what happened in those places affects this one, and how has it changed in your view the way that we look at scandals like this? Like, what is the responsibility of the head coach, who is not just the head coach? He's the face of the state, basically.
Well, he can't allow it. He can't have that going on in his program, and if he has knowledge of it, he has to do something. I do agree with that. But I'll say this, that if my boss comes and asks me, okay, hey, you're in a situation, what happened? Okay, I'm going to tell him, what he needs to know. I'm not, like, okay, hey, I wasn't charged. This is what happened, blah, 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 blah. Now, where they take it after that is kind of on them. But it's tough for me to try to determine, okay, because most people are saying, well, Ohio State should have investigated. Ohio State should have found out. And I'm like, do we want that? Do we, like, they're limited? Aren't they limited by what they can investigate? The wife didn't tell anybody. The wife didn't go to now if Urban Meyer knew or saw the pictures, okay, and heard her side of the story as far as what transpired, and then he knows, wait a minute, whether you weren't charged or not, we can't have this. That's a whole different conversation, okay? Because here, if we're friends, we go out, you get in a situation, and we work together, right? And say if I'm your boss, you tell me, or I get an idea of what actually happened versus whether you were charged or not, I then kind of have an obligation to do something about it. Ohio State has an obligation to do something if they are fully aware of what happened and not what he was and wasn't charged with. But it is not the responsibility, or is Ohio State limited by how they can get that information?
They don't have the power of the government behind them, but to me, but to me, the thing that is hardest to reconcile, and it's sort of the point that Ethan was making, is that it does kind of fall on deaf ears when Urban Meyer says, well, I passed it along to the authorities and the authorities handled it the way that they did, when I think basically the point that Ethan illustrated is that Urban Meyer is the authority. He is the authority on his program. He is the authority, frankly, on that university. So even though there is a technical chain of command, he is the chain of command. So for him to abdicate responsibility like that just is very odd, considering the amount of power that he has.
Here's the problem: that if something's found out, somebody's going to get fired, and it ain't going to be Urban Meyer. I have a feeling. That being said, I do have friends who are, involved with Ohio State, and I just asked the question: have you ever seen anybody continue to do their job that is on paid administrative leave?
Yeah.
Do you ever see them come back?
That's usually the first step. That's the first step towards being fired.
Right. So like, take it a whole nother step. Forget everything that has happened. Anytime you've heard a coach is on paid administrative leave while we investigate, they don't ever go back to that office and say, come on, let's come on back to work. Now, is he a difference maker? Because keep in mind, the coach before him won a national championship too. He got fired over tattoos.
And they can find another good coach relatively easily.
Yeah, I mean that's a premium job. Leroy, one more thing before we move to the next part of this. The point I raised earlier. Why do you think, because as I'm thinking about it, like, why do you think the Michigan State situation has not become sort of the crossover media firestorm? I mean, I know there's been coverage of Larry Nassar and everything else, but
right.
I mean, again, Penn State was on our TVs, like, not, and we're not talking like, I mean, CNN was breaking into coverage to, for rallies on the Penn State campus. Like,
two words. Joe Paterno.
Yeah, for me it would be college football, because in order for it to become a story that crossed over to CNN, it first has to be a sports story. And him doing this in the field of gymnastics, like, we're not prepared to cover gymnastics like we're prepared to cover college football.
Or is this
nobody involved in it is big enough to grasp everybody's attention. Even though look, the story is massive.
Right.
I'm not saying that. But if I say Joe Paterno at Penn State,
right, I get that. But I wonder, Leroy, on two things on that. One is, I mean, there is a current congressman who's involved. I mean, a congressman, Jim Jordan, who's been very, very visible on other issues. So, I mean, there is, there is that, and I just wonder if it's a gender issue too. I mean, I feel like that story was perceived as shocking in a way because it was boys. And I just wonder if this, the Michigan State story is about girls. And I feel like that's a story we've heard before unfortunately.
Right.
And so I wonder if maybe that plays into it. But I just don't think there's been anything close to the coverage. And when you look at the numbers, I mean, the numbers of
and as Leroy is saying, like, this is actually taking place in court as opposed to what, this incident, which is that we're trying to find a police report and it's redacted from 4 years ago, right? All of Larry Nassar's accusers are doing so in a court of law. And are screaming at him, and a father nearly charged him on the stand, I mean,
including Olympians, like we talk about, it's not big names. I mean, Olympians were involved,
like Ali Raceman, and
right. To me, I think it hasn't gotten enough attention. If you want to come and watch Brock Osweiler throw interceptions for the Dolphins, we've got an opportunity for you. We're having our first ever 5 Reasons Sports Network watch party. It's for the Dolphins' second preseason game. The Dolphins will be up in Carolina. We will be at the Texas Roadhouse in Miramar. That's right off of I-75 on Miramar Parkway, convenient to all of South Florida. Our hosts will start getting there around 6:30, 7 o'clock. The game is 7:30. So come hang out with us. There's no charge at the door, nothing like that. We're going to have the back bar. We'll have drink specials. We'll have food specials. We'll have giveaways. Come to the Texas Roadhouse. Again, it's Friday, August 17th. Dolphins' second preseason game. See you there. Let's move on to some local sports here with you first. And I want to touch on the Dolphins. As we're recording this, they're playing their first preseason game tonight. By the time you guys hear it, they may have played it already. But you have a different opinion on the Dolphins. And I have found the Dolphins talk this offseason to be really interesting because there is a segment of the fan base and of the media that just thinks they're not going to be very good. That they gave up. That there are names, Sue or Landry, and others that are not here anymore. I mean, we had Jason Leisure on from the Palm Beach Post. He thinks they're 4-12. And then we have people on our network, like our 3 guys on 3 yards per carry, who think they're going to contend for a playoff spot. I mean, they don't necessarily know if they're going to win the division, but they even Chris Kaufman, who, is sort of our resident expert here, who has not liked much of what Tannenbaum has done the past few years, thinks they had an excellent offseason. Like, he's very big on what they did, allowing Gase to get more multiple, bringing in more options. And I feel they're going to go over, honestly, from the Vegas number. Like, I look at them and I say, okay, they were a 10-win team. Probably a little bit of luck involved. They beat a lot of bad teams by close margins.
There's always that, though.
There is, but then they lost their quarterback, and they won 6, and they had a guy who's not an NFL quarterback anymore starting the majority of their games. Like, I don't know how people think they're a 6-win team this time around when they won 6 with Jay Cutler and Matt Moore. So where do you come down on that?
That's the most important stat that there is, okay? Is that if I take any team in the league that went to the playoffs, then loses their quarterback, goes 6-10, then gets their quarterback back, is it fair to assume they're going to be better than 6-10? Because they got their starting quarterback back, if that position is so important. So let's start there. Now, it's amazing to me, and here's what kills me on radio every day, that we are complaining about losing 3 people that we complained about when they were here. So, and Ndamukong Suh, he is not making any sacks. The defense is the worst in the league. Let's be fair to Ndamukong Suh. He did what was asked of him, caused chaos in the middle of the field. What hurt that defense is their linebacker play. They had nobody backing up that defensive line. And then the offense put a lot of pressure on that defense, and they wore out as the year went on. Okay, let's talk about Jarvis Landry. You had Jarvis Landry. He's catching 100 balls, but again, he's a slot receiver. If you have a coach who likes to throw the ball down the field, you can't pay a slot guy $16 million a year. You can't do it. He cannot be your primary guy if you like going down the field as an offense. And then Pouncey. Part of the reason why the offensive line struggled so much is because they never worked together. Every week they had to introduce themselves to the center because he had hip problems. So one of the things that makes an offensive line good, you can pull up all the stats. All the best offensive linemen, all line groups in the league. The one thing they have is games played together, continuity. And the more guys you have playing consistently, your offensive line is generally going to get better. So with all those things being said, you get your starting quarterback back. They did something to try to improve the linebacker play. In fact, you just got healthy.
Yep.
You got your secondary. I hope Xavier Howard can take this preseason cornerback into the regular season, because he did the same thing last year and started off a little slow and then came on strong in the end. Hopefully he builds on that. Okay. But between the front seven, you sign some guys that hopefully you can depend on the offensive line. Don't worry about what they look like right now. They need time together. And as long as nobody gets hurt and you have the same 5 guys, if you need to make changes, you'll be able to tell instead of playing with 17 different offensive lines. You got Frank Gore. And here's what Frank Gore does. The most important stat in football, 2nd and 7.
Yep.
And everybody makes fun of that.
Whenever we were working together, that was always your thing. Are you getting positive yards on first down with your running game?
Right. If you look at all offenses that struggle, just look at their average second down yards to go. Mm-hmm. You can't put yourself behind the 8 ball like that. So now you have a consistent guy, a guy is always going to be going downhill. He doesn't have to do it 20 or 30 times a game, but at the end of games, when you need, we need to move the chains. Frank, go get us 5, 6 yards, 4 or 5 yards. Open up our offense. That's a big improvement. You got Kenyon Drake. I don't know what he's going to be, because you always find a running back gets a lot of yards when you're losing, because you probably shouldn't be running the ball. And you had Jay Cutler as quarterback, so you were trying to catch up by running the ball, and they'll give you that. So let's see when he gets, beginning of the season, how that all works out. But other than that, you can't tell me that this team isn't better than it was last year. And I'm not saying that the players that are going to be replacing the other guys are better. But I'm saying, based on where they were last year with those 3 players and where the Dolphins are overall, they are a better team. Now, Tannehill gets hurt, all bets are off. And I keep telling people he's not injury prone. It's the same injury that they didn't get fixed the first time. They took a chance. It didn't work. Don't make him injury prone. Just say, we took a chance. We tried to rehab it and do it without surgery. It didn't work. We had to have surgery. It's kind of like Shohei Ohtani, right? He's going to be pitching here soon. If it doesn't work out, right, he's either going to never pitch again or have Tommy John surgery. Because they all do. When they get sore elbows, they all end up having it.
Yep.
So, for people to just all of a sudden, and you know what? Every person that told me the Dolphins are going to be 4-12, I say, why? Why are they going to be 4-12? This will be the first time in history that a team gets their starting quarterback back, and everybody says they're going to be 2 games worse than Jay Cutler.
When you put it like that, for me, the one thing though, when I look at it, is that they lost those 3 guys, and you can make an argument that if you divvied up 160 targets amongst the current receiving core, you could probably get about the same production and the offensive line with Pouncey. But I think the reason why is because they look at those 3 guys as representing the most talented players on the Dolphins. And if you look at the roster right now, there just aren't enough players, or frankly any players, except for maybe Rashad Jones and Cam Wake, that are at the top of their position. So when people look at them, they see a talent deficiency. But what you're saying is they make up for it in other ways. Oh
yeah, but okay. And I hate doing this because I do this a lot and people laugh at me. But I would go through the New England Patriots, go through their roster, and I'm like, man, if these guys were playing for different teams, how many people would want them? Maybe 3 or 4 of them?
Yeah.
Right? So stop. Stop with I got to have the shiny new thing. I got to have the name that I know. That doesn't mean that guys aren't good football players. It just means that you never heard of it. So,
Leroy, we've seen that with the Patriots. I mean, the reality is, since 2001, when this run started, which is winning the division every year but one, right, which was 2008 when Brady got hurt.
Right.
They've continually let guys go. That was the end of the world when, Collins a couple of years ago. Right down the line. Now escaping me, but the defensive end that went to
Jones.
Arizona.
Richard Seymour too.
Richard Seymour, Chandler Jones.
Right.
Going way back, Ty Law. It just over and over and over, they've let guys go. To be honest, Pittsburgh's kind of done the same thing. The Dolphins have been on the wrong end of that. The Dolphins have repeatedly, and I kind of fear that with Danny Amendola, to be honest. The Dolphins keep picking up former Patriots or former Steelers, and outside of 1 year of Joey Porter that worked out, like the Mike Wallace didn't work out. The linebacker
Lawrence Timmons,
Lawrence
no doubt,
Timmons last year didn't work out. Like I feel like there are certain organizations that kind of know it's like better a year early than a year late. I mean, even look at what they did at receiver last year. I mean, they went out and got a premium receiver from New Orleans and then just let him go the next year.
Let him go. No trade. Nothing. Just let him go.
They rented him for a year essentially, and the Dolphins never do that. Like the Dolphins are always now the Gore contract. I'm with you on that. I love the Frank Gore deal. I think what he brings for this first thing, the Dolphins don't have a face at all. And that's what happens when you only have one guy in the top 100 in NFL Network. Like they don't have a face to that team right now. Ryan Tannehill is not it because he doesn't have the personality for it, to be honest.
Right.
But
Frank Gore doesn't.
But Frank.
Everybody knows him. He's a Miami guy. I get you.
He's associated with this area. He's a pro. He's one of those guys that everybody in the locker room loves.
And he's probably going to be a Hall of Famer.
Absolutely.
Right? So to me, like if they can get anything out of him, he's going to be a guy that people, not just the media goes to, but guys in that locker room, more importantly, are going to go to. Like I like that move. Now the Amendola move for the money, I don't know, man. I mean, I know he has stayed healthier the past couple of years, but when you've had concussion problems, you never know when that's going to become an issue again. I know as you had dealt with some of that, like I'm not sold on that one, but they didn't spend that much, so and they spent half of what they spent for Landry, which actually is a good way to transition because we want to get to part 3 here, which is Jarvis Landry. You follow the Browns closely too, and they're on Hard Knocks. And Jarvis, not surprisingly, Jarvis was the star of episode 1 because that's what his personality is. And a couple things on this. First, I want to get into what you think he's going to be with Cleveland because I think that's an interesting topic. But the other is I can't think of that many athletes. And I know you said there were people who were upset at Jarvis when he was here, but 90% of the fan base really liked Jarvis. Like Jarvis was perceived as the one guy who was trying hard all the time on a team where you really didn't know if that was the case, right? I mean,
yes. I will say that. And here's what sometimes hurts that situation. Because like I'm not a big fan of, either an organization or a player going after each other when you're gone, right? And so the organization going kind of throwing shots at him, talking about how he was doing his job, I just thought that was nitpicky, and kind of what Jarvis did when he left was also a little bit nitpicky. So I'm not on either side with that. But, the thing about Jarvis is this. He has the personality to fire up guys and to show guys how to work, how to be a pro, okay? My only problem when he was here was if you're going to be that guy, you can never cost your team. And the 15-yard penalties, okay, it's one thing to be a tough guy. It's one thing to be an inspiration. It's another thing to cost your team because then all the other stuff you're doing loses credibility. And so I'm down with all that stuff he does, but the nonsense on the field, I could do without, okay? You just can't have it. If that's going to be your leader, you can't lead your team in that way. Now, I've seen this movie before, and I'm going to tell you why you have to be careful. And it's not going to be Jarvis's fault. It's not going to be the Browns' fault. I want to say 1995, we signed a receiver from the Atlanta Falcons in Cleveland by the name of Andre Rison. Mm-hmm. Andre Rison had 100 catches plus. He was the guy. Atlanta didn't want to pay him, so Cleveland paid him. And he came here. He came to Cleveland. And he had about 60 or 70 catches. Well, we didn't go to the playoffs that year, so everybody attacked him. It's like, hey, we paying a lot of money. Where's your production? And I'm like, wait a minute. That 60 or 70 catches is like 100 in Atlanta who runs the run and shoot. Fans don't understand that. Mm-hmm. Fans don't get that. And so what ended up happening is then Andre starts snapping back. So when the media and the fans were, oh, you only gave us 4 catches and we paid for 100 catches and you're not fulfilling your contract. While everybody in the building is like, no, you're doing fine. This is our offense. It's not Atlanta's offense. I worry that one, is Jarvis going to get frustrated if he doesn't have 100 catches? Is he going to understand that situation? Because he's put himself out there where Now, all the fans are going to do is look at your numbers, especially with a team that's only won one game in 2 years. And I hope that the Browns will also understand that, hey, we got a new quarterback. It's either going to be Baker Mayfield or probably be Tyrod Taylor. We have to let them know, hey, this is not the Miami Dolphins offense. This is our offense. What is Jarvis Landry going to do when Josh Gordon gets back? They got a tight end who also runs down the middle of the field and is all over the place. They have other options. He is not the only option.
Well, they got a back Leroy, they got a back too in Duke Johnson, who's one of the more guys in the league out of the back. So, like that's an interesting group of players that they have there on offense.
Right. To where one guy doesn't need to catch 100 balls to win a football game. That being said, if you get to the end of the season, Jarvis Landry has 70 catches, 6 touchdowns, you think the fans are going to feel cheated.
Yeah, particularly for the amount that they paid.
Right. Because I'm telling you what, we just saw it with Ndamukong Suh. Mm-hmm. The guy bust his butt. The guy caused chaos on the football field. But because he didn't have numbers, most of the average fans thought the Dolphins overpaid for him because he didn't have numbers.
Right, and Leroy, it's worse for Landry actually because A, he plays a position where numbers matter more, and B, unlike Suh, he wants the spotlight. Like he craves the spotlight. Suh wanted nothing to do with the spotlight. He didn't want anything to do with reporters. He just wanted to hang out with Warren Buffett, which was that's for him. He's going to end up being a billionaire probably. But but Landry wants it. Landry wants to be the face of the Browns. Landry's gone after Tannehill. Landry's gone after the Dolphins. And so I do agree with you. I mean, he's never going to be a guy who's going to average 15 a catch ever. I don't care how they use him. Like it's just not his game. And so best case scenario for me there in Cleveland is, like you said, 70 catches, 5 or 6 touchdowns, and maybe they use him a little differently so he gets up to, something redeemable like 12 yards a catch. But he's never going to be a 15-yard, which means he's probably not a 1,000-yard receiver there if he's not getting the ball 100 times. So I'm with you.
He wasn't a 1,000-yard receiver with 110 catches in Miami, so that's probably not going to happen.
I don't see it happening there either. I mean, Andre Rison was a look. I mean, whatever people thought of Andre Rison and some of the off the field stuff, like Andre Rison was a top 5. I mean, you know this, Leroy, was a top 5 receiver talent in the NFL during his time. On Atlanta, it was Andre Rison and Deion Sanders that everybody talked about. So. I don't know that Landry is Andre Rison is the equivalent of like Julio Jones right now or AJ Green. Like that's a different conversation than Jarvis Landry.
Right. But so, and I got to tell you, I don't think people realize because he's got his own issues. Josh Gordon is the real deal. He can flat out fly, and you don't realize how I think he's like 6'4". So he's not a small dude. Then you got Njoku, okay? So if they use a tight end to stretch the middle of the field, then all Jarvis Landry is going to be running is the underneath stuff.
Which is what he was complaining about.
Right. So, for the most part, I'm not.
Josh Gordon is better. Josh Gordon's better than anybody Landry played with here by a wide margin. Like, if Kenny Stills, Devontae's, that's a whole nother conversation. But I like Kenny Stills a lot, but Kenny Stills' talent level is not Josh Gordon's talent level. So. Kenny Stills is the plus one. Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that if your star on the other side is big enough, he is going to catch a bunch of touchdowns just because, he can beat one-on-one coverage. Who's the guy that played opposite Michael Irving and then went to Tampa?
Oh, Alvin Harper.
That's who Kenny Stills is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because soon as Alvin Harper wanted to be the guy and went to Tampa, what happened?
Yep. We've seen that repeatedly with guys. Yeah, that's right. Guys that played opposite T.O., guys that play, where it really happened, and you're familiar with this, although you had Chris Carter was pretty damn great in his own right, but other guys who played with Randy benefited from that too, and then would go somewhere else and didn't turn out to be anything. They're just, look, at that position, there are, at any time in the league, there are 5 or 6 guys who are just better. Like Antonio Brown is just better. Like, he's made himself into that. Larry Fitzgerald for years was just better. Like that's, and then you have other guys who benefit from playing with him. Atlanta could literally rotate any receiver next to Julio Jones. Sanu was, kind of a borderline third guy in Cincinnati. and had a breakout year in Atlanta because
right.
he's playing next to Julio Jones. So, yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I want to transition with you here to NBA. We know you got your own show to prepare for. Hassan Whiteside. And, you and I had many, many conversations about this because I was on the show with you when they were deciding whether to sign him. And I know, and what's interesting is I think at times you've been much more critical of Hassan than me. And for some reason I've gotten this rep as being a Hassan hater when I actually was in favor of them, giving him the max. So I don't really know where my rep on that has come from, frankly, because I'm just sort of feeding information that I get from inside the organization about their frustrations with him. But I do see, as I've said many times on this pod, his per minute numbers last year were the same to better that they were the year before. Like it's not like he's fallen off a cliff. I think he's lost some athleticism. Maybe it had to do with the injury. And then obviously the playoffs were a disaster. I mean, anybody would say that. But where do you come down on it? Because clearly the Heat have to do damage control now because they didn't trade him. They couldn't trade him. And so now they have to kind of make nice. And that's what Riley has been doing publicly. And, he and Spo, supposedly had this great meeting and all of that kind of stuff. Like once, I guess here's my perspective on it. First, do you think Hassan can turn it around? And two, once a player, because you've experienced this, I'm sure with other guys, once a player's trust with the organization is broken to a certain degree, is that fixable?
The hardest thing to fix, don't even worry about Spo and Hassan. But how does that look to the other players? I'm a big believer that if you do right by the other guys on your team, your coach will have no choice but to play you. But here's what Hassan did that is hard for me to get over. Everybody knew he was hurt, okay? The Heat, the organization that they are, refused to put him out there like that. Saying, now I don't mean put him on the court, but I mean throw that excuse out there for him. They always took the high road in everything involving Hassan Whiteside. Some people will say it's the money. I just think that's how they do business. They've taken the high road on a lot of situations, so I have their track record. I know how they handle their business. Hassan was hurt. He was banged up. He wasn't moving well in some situations. You can't then turn around and complain about your playing time. You can't pout on the court. Okay, you got 4 guys out there that live by a mantra, all-out defense. We do whatever we can defensively. The offense will take care of itself. That's what I've been hearing for the last few years. And he's out there moping, not moving, not giving effort. And maybe he can't. But you can't turn around and put that on the coaches in the organization. At some point in time, Hassan has to accept his responsibility in this and be better. And if you want to be that guy, then be that guy. Make a difference. I personally don't know how much of a difference he can make when at any point in time a team could put a lineup out there that takes him out of the game. And everybody in basketball knows that because he's limited in the things that he can do. Now, guess what? If they could dump it down into him and he could pass it out to an open guy and he was scoring inside consistently, then he becomes a difference maker. But he's a black hole in there. You throw the ball into him, he's going to dribble. He's like, like you get so frustrated. But my thing for Hassan is go about your business professionally, fight through some stuff. And if you're not playing, do something about it.
I actually
find out why you're not playing instead of just moping on the court after practice, making these little comments like you are the all-star and they should be accommodating you.
I actually think that he would have been salvageable going into this season if not for the fact that he had such a terrible postseason. If they didn't make the playoffs and the regular season went the way they did, then you could just say he had a poor season, but he was hurt, and we feel like with an offseason recovery, he's going to be fine. But because the playoffs were such a disaster, I think that there's less of an inclination from everyone involved to want to make it work. And so
you sure it's not he talks to koi fish?
Who does it, Leroy? Everybody does. So that's part. But I'm with Chris on this. But the other thing on this, before we move to the next part, is that the thing about the injury, like, I know this and reported it here on the pod, and then I saw others picked it up too. He didn't want to wear the brace. Like, this was a big issue for the team. Like, they basically threw their hands up because they were trying to get him to wear the brace. He didn't want to wear the brace, and that was the source of a lot of the friction this year from what I'd heard. So, I mean, look, the Heat, I will say this about this. You're totally right about one thing with the Heat, Leroy. The Heat do not do what the Dolphins do. Okay, what the Marlins have done, which is the Heat don't trash guys like the Dolphins do. Like, it's a practice of this Dolphins administration that I don't like, which is kind of that, certain reporters are used to get certain stuff out there. This happened with Landry, it happened with Sue, it's happened with other guys. Okay, right. The Heat don't do that as often. Now, I've said here too, there are certain media members that I know when they're being critical of Hassan, I know it's tacit approval from the team, because there's certain guys who are not going to go out there and say anything negative about anybody on the team unless they have tacit approval. So I know kind of how that works. Okay. But the one thing that the Heat have not done for their players sometimes over the years is they don't like talking about injuries publicly. Okay.
Right.
And like Mike Miller's body was basically breaking into pieces. Okay. Like, and I mean, he was having surgeries like back 2 days later. Like I remember during one of the playoffs, like his back was so bad he could not walk. Okay. And the team wasn't announcing anything with him. Like he went and had an epidural during a playoff series. It was never announced. Okay. I during the 2000, in Boston. So it would have been the year Quentin Richardson was here. I
don't remember that.
Well, no, because it never got reported. In the locker room in Boston, like all of a sudden, like Q had been playing. We knew he'd been playing with a damaged thumb for a while, okay? And then all of a sudden, like one of the Heat PR guys comes over and goes, just letting you know, Quentin's having surgery tomorrow. And it was like, okay, there was never any announcement about this. So the Heat don't like, typically, I mean, it's a Parcells thing. It's a Riley thing. Like they don't like sort of, it's like Parcells always said, you can't make the team from the training room. And you're familiar with that, Leroy. So
yep. Can't make the club in the tub.
Correct. So that's where the Heat operates. So the Heat did not go out there publicly with Hassan's injury last year in a way that they could have, and so I understand the perspective there. But also, I do know they tried to get him to maintain it more than he did by wearing the brace and doing some other things, and they got resistance. And from what I've heard, that's kind of where the hands got thrown up, where it's like, okay, what can we do here? And so, if Hassan's healthier this year, that's going to help. And they do have to rehabilitate it a little bit because, I mean, if they want to move him, that's part of it. But also, I mean, he can still fill a role on the team. Like, there's things he can do that can help them. And they want him also to set, an example for some of the other guys, Bam, that they've got there. And so I'm with Chris. It would have made it easier if the playoffs were not a disaster. But he's going to be their starting center on opening night. Like, that's happening. And fans are going to have to get used to that. And he's going to have to do as much as he can with it. So be interested to see where that goes.
This is the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Sports by Miami for Miami on demand. We now have 10 podcasts in the network posting roughly 15 times per week. All can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and several cross-platform apps. We are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Here's some of what you missed last week on Miami Heat Beat.
I'm in love with this young core. I think they have 3 really solid starter-type players in Winslow, J. Rich, and Bam.
It's funny. I was literally just thinking that to myself like 5 minutes ago, but the fact that Gianni agrees with me really makes me second guess it.
If you want to get involved as a sponsor or a contributor, reach out to us at number 5 Reasons Sports on Twitter. And don't forget to punch 5 Reasons in your search bar and then hit subscribe.
Let's move to part 5 here, Leroy, with you, which is LeBron. And again, I know, obviously, your familiarity with Cleveland, your familiarity with Miami.
I don't have the name Leroy for nothing.
Correct. Well, I had Cleveland for a little while, so that was.
You were living up there.
Well, I wasn't. My contract said I wasn't supposed to be, but tell Bleacher. But anyway, but let's get back to LeBron. And just on this very narrow topic here. We've sort of handled the political stuff with him on Light Skinned Opinions, and I really recommend everybody check out Mike Wallace's appearance there because it's really interesting. But just on the basketball perspective, in Los Angeles, like every day he's the executive producer of something else, right? Like, I mean, they had these deals lined up. Like he's producing a 3-part series on Showtime called Shut Up and Dribble. I mean, that's a shot at Laura Ingraham from Fox News, but it's about athletes and activism and all that. He's going to be involved in a sitcom. There's a movie production thing. I mean, there's a lot of stuff with Spring Hill. So I asked the question for you. And LeBron has always been able to balance all this stuff, and he has a lot of very smart people working for him. Do you think really, this is the one question we'll end this with, do you think he cares about winning championships anymore?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That doesn't just go away. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing to me how people outside of competition think that competitors just want to eat it. I'm reserved to losing. Absolutely not. I don't know where this comes from. You see how people compete? Like there's no way. Now, does he think he can win with that team? I'm going to say yes. You know why? Because he's on the team. And look at the teams he's gotten to the finals. And once you get in the finals, all bets are off. But he's not out. As long as he's putting the uniform on, he's competing. I mean, think about this. You think Tiger is just glad he can golf again, or he's trying to win? You know, not everybody has the Charles Barkley attitude that I just want to get back so I can go out on my terms. Man, we compete with everything. I compete at times I really shouldn't be competing, and I really can't. Once you're a competitor, once you've spent a majority of your life competing, you're always competing. Now, the field may change, what you're competing for may change, but you are always competing. And I have a problem, getting a grip around a guy who has gone to, 8 straight finals?
Yep.
Is all of a sudden saying, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm just going to go out here and relax and just play a little basketball. No, I ain't buying it.
But I think you hit on the point perfectly. It's two things that are balanced up against each other. So for me, the first thing is I think LeBron, and Ethan, you certainly know this, has always understood what he's surrounded by and is always agitated for more. But it does kind of juxtapose against what Leroy said is the ultimate confidence. Well, if I'm on the team, we'll make the playoffs. We'll be competitive. We'll be a contender to win the championship. And maybe he doesn't think they can beat Golden State. But I do think that, particularly given the fact that he signed a long-term deal and that there is going to be extra benefits, he's okay with at least being patient. Okay, I might not be on a championship team this year, but next year, Luol Deng is 1 year closer to getting off our books, and we can trade him as an expiring contract. We have all these young pieces that, if they get better around me, can be tradable for good stuff. We're going to have a ton of cap space again. We'll be able to go again in a year and maybe sign 2 big free agents and really get some really top-quality players that we weren't able to do this offseason. So I do think that LeBron James thinks that if not this year, then very soon he will be competing at the very highest level because he's LeBron James and every team that he's been on, like you said, right. Leroy, like in 2015, he was surrounded by a crew that you would imagine is worse than the current assembly of this Lakers team. And so, yeah, I think that LeBron has to have the ultimate confidence in himself that it won't be an issue. Okay, they might not win the championship, but they can very soon.
Here's the other thing you have to consider. And Ethan, you could probably attest to this more than anyone. This is the second organization where LeBron has gone to and trusted the people running the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so how you go about that, because keep in mind, he signed a long-term deal with the Heat. Why? Because before he signed that piece of paper, he was like, I trust the organization that they're going to do whatever they can to win. And he went out to L.A. Now, I'm going to tell you, when you respect another player, like players respect Magic Johnson, it doesn't matter what his position is. You're doing a deal with Magic Johnson, and he's going to try to win because he's a winner. And when you have that attitude, when you go into a situation, you can always go into a situation like, I'm here, and I know there's no way that this organization is not going to do everything they can do to win. Then it looks like this. But maybe it has more to do with he respects what they're going to do and the job that they're going to do to win. So he's not going in it like when he went to Cleveland and felt like he had to be all over everything and hands-on with everything because he didn't trust that the people doing what they were doing were going to do the best job. And the people that he did trust, they got rid of.
Yep. That to me, Leroy, that's the big thing. I mean, there's two things on that, and I think it's a great point. The first thing is, yes, he held Gilbert's feet to the fire every year with the 1-1 deals, which did not allow them to build. And so I don't have any sympathy for Dan Gilbert on a lot of matters, but I do understand the bind that he was in there, because it's very hard to build an organization when you don't know if you're the major piece of your organization is going to leave at any time. But the second thing is, he found a GM that he trusted in David Griffin. It took some time, but he began to trust him, and then Gilbert wouldn't pay him. And to me, that, everybody talks about the Mickey decision with Mike Miller. To me, the Dan Gilbert decision with David Griffin was much, much worse.
You can get over a player being gone if you replace him with a better player.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, this is no disrespect to Kobe Altman, who I like a lot, who took that job. But it's just, it takes time for LeBron to trust someone in that kind of position. And David earned his trust, and they decided, Dan Gilbert has never extended a general manager ever. He's never extended. And so I put a lot of this on him. All right, Leroy, we really appreciate the time. Again, you can follow him at Big Mouth Leroy. Also catch him with Tobin and Beast every day from 1 to 3. You'll get a lot of these opinions, but then also some others. We hope we can do this again with you sometime. And, we hope that you're right about the Dolphins, because make it a little bit more interesting for us if that's the case.
I've been calling them all liars. So either I'm the biggest fool on the planet and don't know what I'm talking about, or the Dolphins have been low-hanging fruit for the last 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And so whenever you want to write something negative, you go to the Dolphins. Look at their situation. It sucks. So.
Right. All right. Well, maybe it's both true. Maybe you are wrong about everything, and maybe they're wrong about this. It can be both. But we appreciate the time, man. And again, check out the rest of the podcasts in our network. Just type in 5 Reasons to your favorite app, and you will find all of the podcasts in our network. Thanks, Leroy.
All right, guys.